Good afternoon and welcome to today's Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center Livable Communities webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled FHWA Resources for Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals with Charlie Zegeer, Director of the PBIC, Dan Nabors, Senior Transportation Engineer with VHB. We have Libby Thomas, Research Associate with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, and we also have Tamara Redmond, Pedestrian and Bike Safety Team Leader with the Federal Highway Administration to answer questions. My name is Davian Anderson and I'm the PBIC Communications Coordinator. I will be facilitating today's webinar. I'd first like to say hello to our speakers to make sure they are ready and everyone can hear them. Charlie, do we have you on the line? I'm here. Dan? I'm here. Libby?
Yes.
And Tamara?
Yep.
Great. Attendees, if you can hear me and if you can hear our speakers, click the hand in the box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen to raise your hand so that we can be sure our audience can hear us. Great, and it looks like hands are being raised, so we'll go ahead and move forward. Before we get started with today's webinar, I want to go over a few administrative details and the functionality of the webinar software. If for some reason your computer or web browser freezes during the webinar, please reload the website and log back into the program. You'll be able to rejoin the session. Please note that attendees will not be able to speak during the webinar. We do expect a large number of attendees on this call, so by muting your audio, it helps us to cut down on confusion and background noise. As an attendee, you have a control box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen that collapses and expands by clicking the double arrows. Though you won't be able to speak, you will have the ability to ask questions by entering them in the question box. If you have a problem during the webinar, you may enter it here. I'll monitor these questions and respond to you if I'm able. Questions pertaining to the presentation may be asked at any time in the question box, but we will not be addressed until the end of the program, when we have built in about 20 minutes for a discussion period. Please feel free to ask those questions as we go along, and we'll get to them after the presentation. Also, when you exit the webinar, there's a very brief survey that will pop up. We would very much appreciate your feedback back on our performance today. Before we get started with today's program, I want to give everyone a little information about this webinar series. The goal of the Livable Communities webinar series is to better enable our audience to improve the quality of life in their communities by promoting safe walking and bicycling as a viable means of transportation and physical activity. The bi-monthly series was developed by the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center, a national clearinghouse of pedestrian and bicycle-related safety information and resources. We offer information and technical assistance to a diverse audience about health and safety, engineering, advocacy, education, enforcement, access, and mobility as it relates to pedestrians and bicyclists. PBIC and today's webinar are both made possible with funding from the U.S. Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administration. Today's session will also be archived and available for download on our website at www.walkinginfo.org/webinars. In addition to these webinars, PBIC offers 4 different in-person training courses to provide technical assistance to professionals and community members in developing pedestrian safety action plans and improving conditions for walking. These courses can be found at walkinginfo.org/training. Now I'm going to turn the screen over to Charlie Zegeer for the feature presentation on FHWA resources for pedestrian and bicycle professionals. While he's getting set up with his slide presentation, I want to take a quick poll from the audience. I'm going to give everyone a few more seconds to lock in their... Okay, we're now going to get into the second polling question. And if none of these options apply to you, please refrain from answering the question. Alrighty. Thank you for your responses. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation to Charlie.
Okay, good. All right. What we're going to do today is to talk about 7 different tools that are available, mostly from funding from the Federal Highway Administration, some from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They relate to pedestrian bicycle safety. And David's already introduced the 3 speakers today. And let me just give you a listing of what we're going to be covering. Hopefully many of you have also already seen some of these publications over the last few years. Let me just run down quickly and list them. The first one we're going to talk about is how to develop a pedestrian safety action plan. and then the Pedestrian Safety Guide and Countermeasure Selection System, or PEDSAFE. So I'm going to talk about those two documents. And then the next ones on the list, the Bicycle Safety Countermeasure Selection System, or BIKESAFE, and the Pedestrian Bicycle Crash Analysis Tool, PBCAT, will be covered by Libby Thomas. And then the last three, Pedestrian Road Safety Audit Guidelines and Prompt Lists, Pedestrian Safety Guide for Transit Agencies, and a Residence Guide for Creating Safe and Walkable Communities will be covered by Dan Nabors. Okay, first of all, for the how to develop a pedestrian safety action plan, and we call it the PSAP guide for short. It's really intended for a fairly broad range of stakeholders, such as planners, engineers, police, educators, and public health officials, as well as decision makers at the state and local level. Although it also involves some information for advocates and community leaders, neighborhood group representatives, etc. You can see the link to the site. It is on the Pedestrian Bike Information Center website. And there's a series of training courses that have been developed surrounding this information in this guide. And these are sponsored primarily through the FHWA Office of Safety, Tamara Redmond's office. So a number of those have been given primarily in the 13 focus states and focus cities over the last 5 years. I think about 175 different courses offered over the last 5 years related to this. But basically what this guide is it sort of covers some of the basics, some of the planning steps and the activities that are important at the state or local level to really put together all the different components, elements to achieve improved pedestrian safety. So you can see kind of a listing, on this slide, of some of the chapters that are represented in the PSAP guide. It first covers some of the planning and designing principles. It talks about who are the different stakeholders that need to be involved from a community level. Then it gets into more of the data collection, not only the collection of pedestrian crash data, but also other kinds of data we're going to talk about. And then using that data to conduct analysis, identify problems, and then obviously developing solutions to reduce the pedestrian crash risk. And then where do we get funding for implementing some of the roadway and engineering improvements to reduce pedestrian crashes. And then finally, what are some of the other informational resources available that we can go to sort of to help in this process. Okay, let's kind of run through each of the chapters. And the first chapter gets into some of the planning issues. Things like street design. What are the policies that are available at the state or local level for building sidewalks and walkways and street crossings and providing pedestrian treatments at intersections, things like that. What about connectivity? What are some of the practices that agencies have in building connectivity into the street network, which also relates to site design, land use, what are the policies and practices for land use and site design? Site design for some of the businesses, are they taking into account the needs of pedestrians to enter and leave the business? And what about access management? And we talked about things like driveways. Are there too many driveways that conflict with pedestrian movements? And how can all of these planning elements be better accommodated to provide for improved pedestrian safety, so pedestrians are not lost in the shuffle with our local and state policies and guidelines? Next we get into stakeholder involvement. Before we really start analyzing data, who are the people that need to be involved in helping to make this overall pedestrian safety action plan workable, to make it happen? Because we need more than just planners and engineers. We need also educators to help educate the public. We need police for the enforcement elements. Public health officials are a critical part of the overall process, and they do a lot of training and education as well. Engaged, involved citizens and organizations are very important at the community level in particular. public employees, agency officials, and at the state and local level, you need to be involved, engaged to help with the overall process. Now we're recently seeing more interest by business owners, and that they have some real important elements of this that can benefit them in some ways. You know, where you have more pedestrians and bicyclists, but pedestrians in particular, walking by the business at low speeds, or being able to make it a more pedestrian-friendly environment, that's where businesses often are really improved, and we see revitalized towns and cities. And of course, the media is also an important element in getting out the safety messages and other messages that are needed there. Next, in terms of collecting and analyzing data, it's important, and there's a chapter that covers, what are the different kinds of data, not only pedestrian crash data, but also inventory data. In other words, so we know where our sidewalks are, our walkways, where are the traffic and pedestrian signals, where are pedestrian crossings, how many lanes does each road carry. And so we can really look at our complete roadway street system on a system-wide basis, and that really is important to know, when and where we need to make some considerations for maybe some system-wide improvements. Or when we look at sites on a spot-by-spot basis, we need to have some of this data. Pedestrian counts are nice to have, traffic volume counts, number of lanes, as well as pedestrian crash data and other information. It can really help us not only understand why pedestrian crashes are happening, but it really helps us in coming up with the best solutions to treat those problems. Okay, in analyzing the data, we talk about maybe 3 groupings of sites. We can look at crash problems or potential crash problems at spots like intersections or mid-block crossings. We can look at corridors, particularly the high-volume, multi-lane, high-speed corridors are problematic. What can you do along the stretch of highway or corridor? And thirdly, we can also look at things more on a system-wide basis, either looking at individual neighborhoods or even a city-wide kind of analysis. See what kinds of trends are happening. Are crashes overrepresented to children or seniors or in certain neighborhoods within a city? And if so, are there programs like education programs, maybe enforcement, that can be used to go along with spot improvements from engineering? Now, next on the list, we talk about analyzing the crash data, and it mentions PBCAT. Libby Thomas is going to be talking about that in just a minute, so I won't go into that. But then we realize we have limited resources, so what can be done in terms of meeting the biggest needs and addressing the highest priorities of a community or a town or city? And so how can this all be done in a systematic manner? In terms of selecting safety solutions, this guide does go into the engineering, education, and enforcement. It's kind of a balanced approach. We need all 3 of these ingredients. So under the engineering, we don't cover every single engineering treatment under the sun. We really try to focus on the engineering treatments that have been shown to be most beneficial, most effective in reducing pedestrian crashes. Things like raised median islands on multi-lane roads. They can reduce 30 to 40% of your crossing crashes. Things like road diets that can reduce about 30% of your total crashes, pedestrian and motor vehicle crashes. Things like paved shoulders and walkways in suburban rural areas that have been shown to reduce about 80% or more of your walking along roadway pedestrian crashes. Things like adding separate left turn phasing at signalized intersections that have been found to virtually eliminate crashes between left-turning motorists and pedestrians, and also between left-turning motorists and oncoming motorists. So many of these engineering treatments we talk about have sort of a dual benefit to pedestrian safety as well as motorist safety. In the education section, there are a lot of good examples of applications of education, not only in schools, but also for seniors and the general public. This one shown in your slide is in Spanish, and certainly taking into consideration the ethnic group and language of your citizens that are involved in crashes is important. And it goes into a lot of examples, some from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and some that many communities around the U.S. have developed and implemented. And finally, on the enforcement side, it does talk about the role that enforcement does play in going along with education and engineering, and how all these elements need to work together to really help reduce pedestrian crashes most effectively. There's another chapter in the PSAP guide that gets into some of the different funding options. It talks about different sources of funding. Why is it that some cities and communities are much more effective in finding funding to make pedestrian improvements? So it is a matter of helping to be creative, helping to understand how some of these improvements that help pedestrian safety can also be done in conjunction with other kinds of public improvements and other roadway safety improvements, and how they can all work together. What are some of the techniques and sources that can be used to go after additional funding to make roadway improvements for pedestrians. Okay, finally, under resources, in the back of the guide, it does give a number of examples of links and other information that you can go to get more detail on how to conduct pedestrian counts and surveys. As I said, a comprehensive listing of funding sources, tips on how you evaluate some of your engineering or your pedestrian safety action plan programs. What about a checklist for different planning solutions that may be available to you? And also a little information on creating an effective pedestrian advisory board. Now, one thing I'll mention is we do have a separate training course called Creating Livable Communities Through Public Involvement. And that course was developed largely by Pete Lagerway and one of our consultants. And it really gets into addressing some of the issues for advocates, the health community, and business leaders, including information on, setting up a pedestrian advisory board and how these groups can work more effectively with the engineers and planners and public officials. So if you're interested in finding out more about that course, it's a one-day course. We can send you, a link to that information, Davian, when the webinar is over. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about the Pedestrian Safety Guide and Countermeasure Selection System. That's a mouthful. We just call it PEDSAFE. And the purpose of PEDSAFE gets a little bit more into the, the engineering and roadway improvements for pedestrians. Where the PSAP guide that we just talked about dealt more with sort of the overview, the planning, and some of the tasks there. PEDSAFE is really almost totally focused on engineering improvements for planners, engineers, safety professionals, and decision makers. Many of you may have seen a copy of this. It was published, I think, in about 2006, and it's been used in one of our courses on designing for pedestrian safety. But what it has in it is not only the printed document itself, but also it has some expert system software that allows the user to go in and input some characteristics about a site or a corridor that's having maybe some pedestrian safety issues, and enter some basic information, and then it helps generate a listing of candidate countermeasures. So it can be used either from the guide itself, the printed book, or the safety software. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what's included in there. We call this the PEDSAFE Tools. So the PEDSAFE Tools really are comprised of the selection tool, and this is sort of a listing of countermeasures that are available. We have a listing of about 49 different engineering roadway countermeasures that can be used to improve pedestrian safety and mobility. It has the interactive matrix. That's just actually in the guide itself. You can go in and look and see for a given kind of crash problem or a safety problem. It gives you sort of a matrix of what kinds of countermeasures may be most effective to treat that problem. The countermeasure details themselves for the 49 countermeasures. Most of them are on engineering, but for each one, it goes and gives some details about what it is and what it's used for, some characteristics, costs, that kind of thing. And finally, we do have a series of case studies that we're going to be talking about in just a minute. So the selection tool itself involves the user, first of all, choosing a location. It may be a location that's had several pedestrian crashes, or maybe several near misses, or is similar to other locations in that city that have had a lot of pedestrian crashes. So identify a location, could be a spot, a corridor. then describe the site, what are the characteristics of it, and then select the goals for the treatment. What is the intent? What are you trying to accomplish in dealing with that location? So usually you can fill this out online, either the name of the street or the intersection name. Then there's a part of the software you can see over to the right that says data input. And this is where it asks you a series of questions. What is the type of the location? Is it urban, suburban, rural? What is the functional class? Is it intersection mid-block? What's the traffic volume? And what's the type of traffic control that's there? It's kind of like when you go into a doctor with an ailment and you have a pain in your knee or something, and he asks you a series of questions because he's trying to really get more information to pin down the cause of the pain or the problem. It's the same thing here, that this program asks for details about the location so it can help lead to the correct countermeasure. Okay, now the next step is also really important because you can answer. It asks you, what is the performance objective? And that's just a big term for what is the problem? That you may want to reduce speeds of motor vehicle traffic, or improve the sight distance, or reduce the volume of motor vehicles going along the street, reduce exposure for pedestrians, in other words, so that pedestrians not in the street quite as long, or improve pedestrian access or mobility, encouraging walking by improved aesthetics, which can increase the amount of walking. Or what about where motorists or pedestrians are really not complying with local laws? Are there some treatments that can benefit there? And many of those treatments could involve some engineering improvements or other kinds of behavior that can lead to crashes. So if you have in mind the kinds of behaviors or situations that you want to change, you can fill out one or more of these dots. If, however, you have more detailed crash information, maybe several pedestrian crashes, and you can determine what type of crashes they are, you can then select one or more of the following crash types. So if it's an intersection, it may be a multiple threat crash or a turning vehicle crash. So you can indicate the kinds of pedestrian crashes that are occurring at that site. So that really helps define what the problem is. Okay, and then based on the input that you've given to the program in terms of the site characteristics and the kinds of problems you're having, then this expert system software will generate, it'll take those 49 different countermeasure options and really give you a short list, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 countermeasures that may all be reasonable candidates for treating that location. For example, it wouldn't give you the same countermeasures necessarily at a high volume signalized intersection as it would on a lower volume local street. So it really is in tune to the input the user gave. And we developed this expert system based on input from a lot of pedestrian and safety experts from around the country. So it's pretty good. But it really doesn't give you the final answer. It gives you sort of a short list of solutions that need to be considered and looked at further. Okay, the countermeasures that are given in PEDSAFE are given in these basic categories: pedestrian facility design, roadway design, intersection design, traffic calming, traffic management, signs and signals, or other measures. So to give you an idea of what it covers. And this next slide here shows what this interactive matrix will look like. You can see the one at the top, will give you sort of different options that you can choose from in terms of the performance measures, and then the one on the bottom with the crash different types. And you can see that there are dots in the different cells that, so for example, if you want to reduce vehicle speeds, you look at that category and look from left to right, and then the dots in the cells which would tell you sort of which countermeasures would be useful in addressing that problem. Okay, and the last thing with the PEDSAFE guide is about 70 case studies. We call them success stories. And we've documented these success stories from agencies around the country, in the U.S. and a few foreign countries, examples actually. And in each one, it asks the question, what was the problem to begin with? And what was the solution that was selected, and why was it selected? And then what's been the outcome? Now that may be, pedestrian crashes dropped, or maybe speeds were reduced, or maybe more people are using the facility, or maybe the result of surveys of citizens and what they think about the treatment. But then it also gives the cost of the treatment and a local contact name of a person and phone number to call to find out more about that kind of treatment. So it's just kind of showing how some of these types of roadway and engineering countermeasures have been implemented across the country and are really reaping benefits for pedestrians in terms of safety and mobility. Okay, so anyway, with that, I think next on the agenda is Libby Thomas, and Libby's going to talk about a couple more tools. So, Libby?
Alrighty, thank you, Charlie. I'm going to now turn the screen over to Libby. I do want to let the attendees know that we did send out the link for the Creating Livable Communities Through Public Involvement training course. If you did not receive that link, please feel free to let us know. Alright. And Libby, if you would take the presentation from here.
Thanks, Davian. Okay, do things look good now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Charlie, and thanks, Davian. All right, so I'm going to, as Charlie mentioned, talk about PBCAT, but also talk about BIKESAFE, which is sort of a companion volume to PBCAT and tool that was created specifically to address bicycle safety and performance issues. And so again, this is kind of targeted fairly broadly. I think it can provide good information for a wide variety of practitioners as well as a more general audience, and it's also available for on our website, the bicyclinginfo.org website. And all right. Oh, my slides aren't advancing. Okay, next slide. So this is the first screen for BIKESAFE. Actually, I think I skipped one slide. Okay, so why should we use BIKESAFE? Again, it's mostly about treating existing roadways, understand and address specific crash problems, or as Charlie mentioned, if you don't know exactly what your crash problems are, or you just want to take a more proactive, broader view in addressing safety and accessibility for bicyclists in your community, you can use these broader performance objectives. You can benefit from others' implementation experiences through about 50 case studies and learn about the uses, estimated costs, and considerations for, I believe it's a similar number, about 50 different countermeasures. And it's just another one of the tools to use as part of a comprehensive effort to address bicycle safety in your community. So this is the first page of the tool, the website, and it's similarly divided into resources and tools. The resources provide background and understanding, general understanding of bicyclist needs and considerations, as well as a lot of good background on crash factors and analysis and links to many other resources. There is a document that contains basically all of the information contained on the website is in a version that you can download as a PDF and print out if you choose to. And then on the tool side, we have also the interactive selection tool and interactive matrices, countermeasure descriptions, and case studies. And so you can use the website in many different ways and connect, link back and forth from one item to another. So on the resources side, this is just kind of an example. It provides information on crash types and some of the possible causes that might be in play when you have a certain type of crash going on at a location. And then moving into the tools, this is a view of the interactive crash matrix. We have 13 different crash groupings shown in the matrix there. And again, as Charlie described, you can scroll across and select particular crash type, and what type of countermeasures you're interested in looking at, the buttons there, and then that will link you to a variety of countermeasure descriptions in that particular grouping of countermeasures. So we have shared roadway, on-roadway bike facilities, intersection treatments, maintenance treatments, traffic calming treatments, trails and shared use paths, markings, signs, and signals, and education and enforcement measures that all could be considered. This is a shot of the objectives matrix, which has 7 performance objectives. You might be interested in just in general providing safe space on the roadway for bicyclists in the context appropriate for that type of roadway. And then in this example here, we used provide and maintain quality surfaces for bicyclists. We were interested to see what maintenance countermeasures were available, and then that takes you to the result here, the applicable types of countermeasures, and then you can click on those and go and read about them. One of the other tools are just the descriptions of those countermeasures, and again, they're organized into the different groups. They provide a description of the general, most often used purpose of that countermeasure, some of the considerations that you might not have thought of, and issues you maybe should bear in mind when you consider using that countermeasure, estimated costs, and those are just very general. And then links to the case studies that talk about that particular type of countermeasure. Again, this is the selection tools. You can describe your location in detail when you are trying to narrow down your countermeasures for a particular type of crash issue or other priority. In this case, we are interested in countermeasures to treat a problem of motorists turning and merging left into the path of bicyclists. And then you can go to the next step and describe your scenario as Charlie described. It's very similar on the bicycle side. You can select where the location occurs in general. Is it on the roadway or at on a path, a shared use path? And most of the measures here are targeted for the roadway, but a lot of them are appropriate for paths. And as you notice, there was a specific group of measures that target specifically path issues and particularly junctions of paths with roadways. So then what type of area is the roadway located? That may help narrow down the appropriate countermeasures through is it an urban or more rural type of context? The functional class of the roadway. Where is the problem located? Is it an intersection issue or mid-block issue? The vehicle volumes, the motor vehicle volumes, the prevailing speeds on the roadway, number of lanes, and so forth. And so once you do that, if you don't select any of these factors, then you'll just get the full, it won't narrow down your shopping list of potential countermeasures at all. But then you get your results, and here are some of the applicable countermeasures. And as you can see, it returns still quite a long list of possible measures here. And the reason for that is we found when we were developing the tool with the safety experts from around the country that in different contexts and so forth, different measures might be considered. Or in other words, there's also a wide variety of particular examples of countermeasures under some of these broad descriptive measures, like optimized signal timing, for example. That could include everything from providing a leading pedestrian interval to a protected left turn phase. So because some of these countermeasures are quite broad, they may have a variety of particular treatments that are applicable to different scenarios and different contexts. So once you get your results, you can also output these results to Excel if you want to, and then you can go back. Perhaps you have a pedestrian safety problem at the same location. You could find out what countermeasures are suitable for pedestrian issues, and perhaps you can find some commonalities among these. or you can change your parameters and get other results, or you might have another crash problem that you want to treat. So the tool is very flexible in its use. And then again, you can go and read about the tool and then link to examples of case studies that have implemented different treatments, see what their experiences were with the treatment. Here's another countermeasure, curb radii revisions. Provides a detailed description, images, and then you can link to case studies. And this is not a case study about curb radii revisions. We'll get to that next. But each of the case studies includes background, what the countermeasures were that were implemented, and as much evaluation as was available, recommendations from that community, cost and funding information, and also contact information. So you can learn from your colleagues around the country. Here is a case study about curb radii revisions from Seattle. So if we want to know what were the types of crashes that are a problem in your community and how to determine performance priorities, how do we get that information? Charlie already talked a little bit about some of these tools, like how to develop a pedestrian safety action plan. There's another tool that I guess we're not talking about today, the pedestrian and bicycle intersection safety indices, and then some that Dan is going to talk about, the audit guide. And now to learn about the crash problems, PBCAT can help us with that. The purpose of PBCAT is that it helps to develop a detailed crash database that can help us understand what's going on in crashes between bicyclists or pedestrians and motor vehicles. And that's a first start in understanding crash problems and helping address some safety needs. Typically, state crash databases have information on when, where, who was involved, like the age and so forth of the pedestrians and motorists involved. But when a bicycle or a pedestrian was involved, oftentimes that's all it tells us about what happened. It doesn't give us a more detailed accident type. So, and so not all databases are the same, but that's the typical scenario. So crash typing was developed to answer what happened on leading up to the crash and the type of location where it occurred. And hopefully that information, with that improved level of detail, we can develop better countermeasures. One thing that you do need is access to hard copies of the police crash reports. And looking at those detailed crash reports is also a good experience because it lets you see the wide array of factors that might contribute to crashes, but also it helps you to begin to see patterns and things that might be targeted by treatments because they have things in common. So crash typing has a fairly long history. Originally, NHTSA sponsored some early research that led to crash typologies, and these have evolved through a number of iterations. There was a study in the early 1990s that typed a number of crashes from 6 states around the country to get a representative sample of pedestrian and bicycle crash types, and that led to a lot of good information that helped us develop some of the countermeasures that we have today. And then in response to that, the idea came about to develop a tool to help people type their own crashes. And so there was a version 1 available since 1999, and version 2 was released in 2006. So if you had seen an earlier version of PBCAT, I urge you to download the free version 2 software. And this is the splash page for where you can go to download it for free. And there's also ongoing technical support, thanks to FHWA for providing support for that. So PBCAT version 2 has a lot more familiar interface, so it's a little easier for people to get used to. A lot of customization options. It links directly to PEDSAFE and BIKESAFE, so it provides all the resources of countermeasures available from these 2 tools. And it has a lot of reporting capability and output. You can also choose some different options in typing. If you don't need all the specific detail available, you can just type options to a group level, and then you can also get more detail if you want to about pedestrian intersection crashes. So there's a scenario there. I'll show you what that looks like later. And finally, a very important function is that it's easy to export data and tables and reports from PBCAT. And that is very important to keep in mind, because if you have access to a local or state crash database already that contains other factors for pedestrian crashes or bicycle crashes, then you do not need to re-enter those data in PBCAT. You can focus on just typing the crashes, and you can easily merge the data together later outside of PBCAT to use it for more detailed analyses. So this is what a crash typing screen looks like, and so it's pretty user-friendly. There are images which illustrate example scenarios, and the first screen is to choose a general description of where the crash occurred. But when you scroll over these windows, then it pops up the precise definition of what is meant by that particular image, and so it gives the detail of how to make your decision. And then when you click on one of the screens, it moves to your next window. This is not the next window, but it's this is what the pedestrian intersection scenarios look like. This information was explicitly asked for by practitioners when they were wanting these details about the leg and the maneuvers of intersection crashes, so that they could identify not only the general type of crash that occurred at an intersection, but the precise leg and direction and approach and so forth of where the crash occurred. So if you choose to use these detailed intersection crash typing for pedestrian crashes, you can get that information. And then you can take it later into the field with you when you're doing audits, which Dan will talk about. This is another crash typing screen with a description of a multiple threat crash. Other data elements that are captured, in addition to the general location type from the first screen, whether it was an intersection or non-intersection crash or actually occurred off the roadway, such as in a parking lot or other off-roadway area. When you're typing bicycle crashes, you can capture the data on where was the bicyclist just before the crash occurred, where was the bicyclist riding before any maneuvers that led to the crash. And then you can also capture whether the bicyclist was traveling in the direction of traffic or facing traffic, or whether that was not applicable in this situation. And then you can produce reports with PBCAT, summarizing your data, like the types of crashes by intersection, location, and again, you can export this kind of table to create nice figures and charts, or you can export the data itself, as I mentioned before. And then you can link, once you know what your crash problems are, then you can link directly to PEDSAFE and BIKESAFE, and it does take advantage of the interactive web-based tools. On this page are links to the mapping that shows how the PBCAT crash types are related to the PEDSAFE and the BIKESAFE crash types. So this provides an easy way of moving between the tools and understanding what your crash problems are. An application example from Chapel Hill, we use PBCAT. Well, I should first mention in North Carolina, we've been typing all of the pedestrian and bicycle crashes for about 13 years now. So we have an extensive statewide crash database, which includes the types of crashes. The other factors, I hinted at this before, the other factors come from the state crash files. So we're able to just type the crashes and then merge the data we get from the typing with the details from the state crash files. We use those data in Chapel Hill to identify the crashes that occurred in the city. Then we geocoded the locations of those crashes and analyzed spatially where high crash areas were. We could look at what types of crashes were common in Chapel Hill in general, and those are the top 3 crash types that we found in this area. And if we can also look at the detail on a more specific location basis. So once we knew what some of the high crash areas were and the types of crashes, then we went out and did roadway safety audits at some of these locations and identified these conditions, which we need to know if we're going to choose appropriate countermeasures. We can look at signals and phasing and the number of lanes and so forth, the light conditions, as well as the behaviors, and that's, I'm sure Dan will talk about that more. And all of this information went into helping us narrow down to the more optimal countermeasures. And then we can make recommendations of some countermeasures to consider by the local agencies. Again, as Charlie mentioned, these aren't final lists from BIKESAFE or from such analyses, but they still must undergo detailed engineering analysis and review. But it helps to narrow down the types of countermeasures that might be appropriate for the situations and the behaviors you're seeing. So we had already identified, for example, from the crash typing, we knew that wrong way cycling was a frequent occurrence in cycling on the sidewalk. And but the one thing that we couldn't tell from the crash data, and that's why it's important to combine multiple sources of data, is that there are lots and lots of driveways with sight distance issues, so that could enhance the risk of these kinds of motorist pull-out crashes because they can't see bicyclists riding the wrong way on the sidewalk very well. But there are also wide turn radii, big wide intersections with high speeds at some locations. So again, it's important to analyze the crash data. It helps you understand the problems, but it's important to go out and look on the ground to see what's going on as well. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Dan to talk about the next steps. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Libby. All right, let me set this up here. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes, Dan, I think we are good to go.
Okay, great. So like Libby said, I'm going to talk about pedestrian road safety audit guidelines and prompt lists. And you can see right here on the screen, this shows the purpose, which is to provide basically a better understanding of the needs of pedestrians when conducting an RSA. The audience, the intended audience, is state and local transportation agencies, but also anyone that wants to conduct a pedestrian or a pedestrian-oriented RSA. So this explains what a road safety audit is. You'll see that's the definition on that page, and there's 4 key terms that are underlined there. One being formal, meaning it's a formal process that's been established in this country for about 15 years. Safety performance, meaning that's really the focus of why you're conducting the PED RSA. The third term is independent, meaning you have an independent outside agency or leader that is helping to provide a fresh set of eyes or an outside perspective to some of the issues that are under consideration. And then the final one is this multidisciplinary team approach, which is really critical for the success of conducting an RSA. You know, getting people, different planners, different specialists, like somebody who specializes in pedestrians or bicyclists, law enforcement, as you can see in the picture on the right, because law enforcement provides perspectives that you really aren't really captured on paper. So just ensuring having this multidisciplinary team ensures that you're attacking the issues from multiple angles, and that really helps you to define the problem. And if you can define the problem, then you're more likely to find a successful solution. Okay, so the RSA, it's a tool that considers all road users. You want to make sure that you're looking at not just pedestrians, but how pedestrians interact with all road users. You also want to consider all environmental conditions. As you can see in this picture right here, this is a situation where snow is obstructing pedestrian movement. Not all areas will have snow issues, but there's other weather conditions that need to be considered. And that doesn't mean you go out there in torrential rains or whatever to ensure that you're observing pedestrians to get a good assessment, but you have to really consider if those conditions are happening, then what are the results? Why are road safety audits needed? Well, basically because roadways need to anticipate common driver errors. And I'm sure law enforcement can tell you that very often when they report to the scene of an accident, a motorist or some other road user will say, well, I didn't expect to see that pedestrian crossing the road, or I didn't expect some sort of condition. Well, we need to incorporate this expectancy principle into the design. And RSAs, by looking at things from this multidisciplinary perspective, really help do that. The other thing is that you have to consider why you want to conduct an RSA is that not all road safety issues are identified in collision reports, and that's especially true with pedestrian-type collisions. There's been various studies that have shown that maybe about 50% of pedestrian crashes go unreported through state reporting agencies. And then again, to ensure that all modes are considered, and you can see in the photo there, you have bicyclists, transit, and pedestrians all interacting together. So some of the issues with the way roads have been built are shown here. You'll see in the photograph on the left that it shows a push button that's being covered by bushes. So that's something that's kind of a temporary issue and can be fixed fairly easily, but still it presents an obstacle to pedestrians. The picture on the right shows a push button that's actually below knee height for a human being. It looks like a pet crossing or something. But again, that's a more permanent issue in that it makes that push button inaccessible. Then you start to have even more serious issues in terms of pedestrians walking on the roadway and getting conflicting with traffic that's coming out of access points. That's the photo on the left. And then the photo on the right shows a probably even more serious problem in a difficult situation where there's conflicting turning movement traffic that with a pedestrian crossing. You see in the photo here, pedestrians do have the walk signal, but that vehicle turned left in front of them to beat the oncoming traffic. So, there's different degrees of pedestrian issues, and by conducting the RSA, it helps you prioritize those issues. Just a few other quick examples of some other considerations that you think of when you're conducting an RSA is pedestrian desire lines. In this photo here, you see a parallel path to the sidewalk that's about 10 or 12 feet away from the sidewalk, and that's really where pedestrians prefer to walk. They prefer to have a buffer space between traffic and walking along the roadway. And that's that's a similar trend that you can see when pedestrians are crossing the roadway. You see the pedestrians crossing outside of the crosswalk here because they're basically following that straight desire line, which is created by walking along the sidewalk. They're not kind of going out of their way to walk in that crosswalk right there. So considering pedestrian desire lines and how pedestrians are actually using facilities is critical to conducting an RSA. So in the guide, it provides several pieces of information. The first kind of section is what is referred to as the knowledge base, which basically provides that kind of basic information you need to have about pedestrians before going into an RSA or conducting an RSA or pedestrians are present. There's different resources, as you can see in the photo there, that shows PEDSAFE, which is a great resource, which was discussed earlier in this webinar. NCHRP Report 500 talks about some of the measures for pedestrians, and then, of course, the AASHTO guide for pedestrian facilities. Those are all kind of basic resources. It also talks about characteristics of pedestrians that you need to consider, like what are the walking speeds and spatial needs, what potential impairments pedestrians might have, and how that might affect pedestrian safety. The third bullet there, analyzing pedestrian crash factors, and you can see there's, it talks about tools like PBCAT, which Libby described, and also other considerations in interpreting data with pedestrians. And I described really briefly the fact that you might not see all pedestrian crashes reported. The second part of the guide talks about, well, really kind of what it provides are prompts. And these prompts basically are there to help remind a user to look into this particular safety issue or investigate to see if this condition is a safety issue. And there's 4 different categories that those prompts are separated into. The first, you see on the upper left, is streets. And there you see a picture of pedestrians, actually kids walking in the roadway because they're kind of forced to walk in the roadway in this situation because there's a culvert that basically has no shoulder present. If you go across to the right, parking areas and adjacent developments, that's another area that it provides prompts. And you can see in that photo there's 2 pedestrians walking down the center line of a development that has a parking area. And that's because there's no sidewalks. There's no place where people have to walk, so they're just kind of trying to make the most of a potentially bad situation. The lower left shows crossings. Crossings is the other category, and what the photo shows, just an elderly pedestrian crossing a crosswalk that has been enhanced and is a fairly good crossing. And then the last category for which prompts are provided is pedestrians using transit. You see in this photo here, there's a landing, a safe landing for pedestrians to access buses, but there's no curb cut or ramp that provides access for pedestrians who might have some mobility restrictions. So I talked about the formal process. This slide right here just illustrates that process. It's an 8-step process which goes all the way from identifying the project to creating a plan basically on how you're going to address the issues that are discovered in the RSA. And in between that is conducting that assessment, going out to the field and investigating the problems. And this is really highlighted in the guide in terms of what are the considerations when going through this process. You need to look at when you're specifically looking at what are the issues that there could be with pedestrians. So some other components that I had started to mention are the prompt lists. And the prompt lists basically are what the RSA team can use to help remind them of all the issues that could potentially be there for pedestrians and to ensure that they're really investigating those potential issues thoroughly. So there's the 4 zones I talked about: streets, street crossings, parking areas, adjacent developments, and transit areas. And those are basically the columns you see in this master prompt list. And then there's subtopics ranging from the presence or design all the way to signals and visibility and lighting. So basically by using this prompt list right here, this kind of reminds the RSA team these are the things you need to be looking at. And if you needed more detail in terms of what to investigate, there's these detailed prompt lists are provided. And you can see on the left, you see there's a column that shows the master prompt, and A1 refers back to the zone and then that subtopic. So that would be specifically streets and then the street design. And you can see here there's just a list of some of the prompts that you would look for when investigating pedestrian facilities along the street. And if you need further detail, there's also detailed descriptions that accompany those prompts. And you can see on this sheet that's shown here, this is an excerpt from the guide. It shows the master prompt, which is the first sheet I showed you. It showed the detailed prompt question, which is the previous slide I showed you. Then it shows some more detailed information as to what to look for. It's usually accompanied by photographs and explanations, and also examples from previous RSAs that really help underscore some of the specific issues that might arise from that specific condition. So again, basically that guide is used to help RSA teams conduct a thorough road safety audit and ensure that there is adequate consideration of pedestrians in that process. You can see in this photo here is that RSAs are being used by a lot of agencies with a lot of success. And you can see this photo shows a narrow sidewalk with traffic along the sidewalk. And this guy is kind of looking like developing a strategy as how he's going to walk down the sidewalk. Well, as a result of an RSA, you see it's a much different situation where there's a lot of room and space for pedestrians to walk. And RSAs are really good in helping really pinpoint the issues and showing what are the potential consequences of those issues. So that's the first guide that I was going to go over. And since we're limited on time, I'll go right into the next one very quickly, and that's the Pedestrian Safety Guide for Transit Agencies. And here you can see the purpose is to help transit agencies consider pedestrian safety when they're placing their facilities. And really the guide focuses on bus stops, because bus stops really make up most of the a large portion of the problem that's out there in terms of the pedestrian interaction with transit. The audience is for this guide is transit agencies and their partners, because it's also helpful for their partners because it helps them understand the transit provider's perspective too. And one of that gets really to one of the main points of this guide, which is really emphasizing the partnership aspect of addressing pedestrian safety when looking at transit agencies. Transit obviously forms a link to other transportation modes. It's the one thing that connects people from walking on foot to the actual riding the transit. A lot of people will drive to transit. So there's pedestrians are obviously an integral part of that. But since it is a kind of link to other modes, it requires coordination with other agencies or other departments within agencies where pedestrians might be considered, or bicyclists or motorists might need consideration. So that's kind of one of the main themes of this guide. So you can see on this slide, this shows an overview of the topics covered in the transit guide, and I'll go into those a little bit more detail, but I just want to point out one thing. The image on the lower right-hand corner shows the cover of a few transit guides for different state and local agencies. And what that is there for, to show that there's case studies that illustrate how the tools can be used in each of these sections of the guide, each of these 5 sections that are shown right here. And that really helps provide a good picture of the successes that transit agencies have seen in promoting pedestrian safety. So the first section right here, it shows, it covers the tools, what are the basic tools that you can use for helping to address pedestrian safety. Bus stop assessments is one of those tools. And those are basically checklists that are used to inventory and assess bus stops and roadway characteristics within the area surrounding a stop. They can be used by transit agencies or local residents, and they cover conditions such as the sidewalk presence, what are the crossing treatments nearby, are there any obstructions, are there shelters and seating, and what are the conditions of those things. So it can go into a lot of different features. You can see just to the right there, that shows one of an example of a checklist from the Easter Seals Project Action Toolkit for the assessment of bus stop accessibility and safety. Also, bus stop assessments we talked about, using the RSA prompt list, and you can see below that in the lower right-hand corner, and it's really small, I know it's too small to read, is the pedestrian RSA prompt list for transit. And those are just a couple examples of tools that can be used to help assess bus stops. The second point there, pedestrian observation and questionnaires. And those take advantage of basically first-hand knowledge and issues that identify routes and identify issues from the user perspective. And those results are very often part of a larger study, but that's something that has seen a lot of utility too. Third point there, pedestrian crash analysis. And this kind of ties in with some of the points we were making before, but again, you have to caution that all the crashes that you have recorded might not be all the crashes that you're having. So the lower left-hand corner shows case studies, and I just want to get a little bit into that. I had mentioned the case studies before, but a lot of the case studies that are in the guide really help show how different agencies have been successful. And this one right here just shows a program that is in Montgomery County, Maryland, where what they've done is they basically did an assessment of all their bus stops in the county and prioritized which bus stops needed to be addressed to make a safer stop. And you can see here, by that program that the county did, they were able to address a lot of them and are still in the process of addressing some of the issues at bus stops. So here you see that there's really an accessible path to the bus stop, and then as a result of their study, they were able to make an accessible path. So again, the case studies are a big part of what is provided in the guidebook. And you can see there, the pictures on the right side of the screen here actually show another bus stop that was improved as part of Montgomery County's bus stop improvement program, where there's no landing pad or no access to this bus stop that's placed on an island. And what they were able to do is provide an accessible walkway, an accessible pad, and then a little knee wall too, which helps provide seating. And it's also, you can see, because it has that kind of rock texture, it's also graffiti proof. So, it's also easily maintained. The next section is policy and organizational approaches that agencies can undertake to improve pedestrian safety. Of course, taking internal action discusses organizational methods such as establishing a pedestrian or bus stop coordinator position within an agency, possibly providing periodic training on pedestrian safety to staff and operators. So those are a few things. Updating policies such as inventory. What is the policy for inventorying what facilities a transit agency has, and ensuring that that's being coordinated with the local transportation agency. Also, changing bus routes possibly and stop locations to reduce walking distance or facilitate better transfers, just to reduce the exposure of pedestrians. Also developing partnerships. I had mentioned that as one of the key things in this resource, and you can see that's really partnerships with local, regional, state agencies, residents, the development community, to ensure that people are educated and informed on what are the needs of pedestrians and how to go about addressing some of those pedestrian needs. Engineering, education, and enforcement is the next section that we'll discuss very, very briefly. And I won't go into a lot of detail with the engineering actions such as the design and traffic control devices, but I'll just say that a lot of the things that are commonly used, a lot of the things too that are part of FHWA's 9 proven safety countermeasures are in there, such as median islands. There's also curb extensions or bump outs or bulb outs, pedestrian signals and things like that. When we talk about rail crossings, like I said, it's really, the guide focuses more on the interaction between buses and pedestrians, but it does talk about some rail issues. And, it talks about some of the enhanced safety features you can use to safely convey pedestrians, such as active warnings and fencing. And there's also resources that are provided for further research for somebody who's using this guide, such as the FHWA Railroad Highway, the FHWA Railroad Highway Crossing Handbook, or the Federal Rail Administration, the compilation of pedestrian safety devices in use at grade crossings. Education enforcement is obviously an important component because it's really important to inform users of their responsibilities and of the potential hazards or consequences of certain actions. So there's a lot of information that's provided for education and also enforcing. There's also the last two sections here talk about, again, some of the background information and pedestrian safety concepts that I had mentioned when I talked about the PED RSA guide. That's discussed here. You can see the graph on the right there just shows what is basically, how many people or how far will people walk to access transit. So in the next couple minutes here, let me go really quickly through the residence guide. And you can see the purpose here. Basically, it's used for residents to help them provide a safer community. And the audience is, of course, people participating at that community level. Some of the main overview right there is shown on this slide. And let me just say that, basically it's to there's three basic points of this guide. One is to educate the public, inform them of different methods to help them address safety, and then to promote, of course, a safe walking environment. This next slide shows the 5 main sections of the guide. On the left side, you can see that those are the 5 main sections, and then on the right, that's how they're kind of displayed in the guidebook. Basically, the guide is written in such a way that it's really non-technical in nature, because you want everybody to have a thorough understanding of the concepts that are provided in the guide. It's organized, as you can see. Each chapter provides a question, so it's in this question-type format. It's also color-coded, as you can see from the excerpt on the right, to help residents or help you, the user, more easily access that information. All right, I'm going to cover each of these sections in more detail now. So you can see here, the first question is, how do I identify problems with walking conditions in my neighborhood? And it helps provide information to the user to provide, identify what are poor accommodations, such as issues with connectivity or continuity, and things that are less evident, such as the ability to see or detect traffic. So it's like actual infrastructure and behavioral types issues that it goes over. Also ways to assess those problems, such as checklists, and you can see on the right there, it shows the walkability checklist and promotes use of that. And also communicating with community members and finding out what's already being done by the local agency, or what is in the plan, or what is planned to be done in the future. This is kind of really the main section of the guidebook right here, and it really answers the question, who can help me make my neighborhood a safer place to walk? And here's the 4 steps. These are the main 4 steps that it goes through. The first one, really determine the scale of the issues. It's something really simple that needs a lot of coordination, or is it more complex that would require some more community support? Something simple is like replacing a stop sign or something like that. So if it is something that requires more community support, then you go to the second step, build awareness and community support by working with different members of the community, but also reaching out to other organizations that might be able to help provide some service, such as you may have service-oriented groups or civic groups, even advocates in the area. So just really kind of putting the teams together to help identify and address issues. The third step is to identify the agency. The fourth is to contact the agency representatives and present the case. So it goes through some more detail there. And it also provides a 5th step, which isn't listed on the slide. But that 5th step really helps build support for long-term change, like establishing a pedestrian advisory committee, or engaging in the master planning process, or conducting periodic walking tours. Different things that can be done at that level to sustain a safe pedestrian community. The third section talks about how can walkability be improved, and it really, you see there's 4 E's right there: engineering, education, enforcement, and encouragement. It really presents it from a combined approach, with understanding that if you're going to have something built, that's not going to completely address the issue necessarily in all situations. So there's education measures that are provided there, such as teaching traffic safety skills and raising awareness of issues. Enforcement, not only enforcement strategies for law enforcement, but for the community too, such as putting up crossing guards and things like that. To the right there, you can see that there's an excerpt from the guide itself that shows how some of this information is provided. You see the circle shows that there's a link for providing more detailed information, so that it doesn't make the guide too thick. And then there's also case studies where the arrow is pointing right there that really help explain how communities have successfully engaged to improve pedestrian safety. This next section is I need more information that just provides terminology so they can talk with different people to describe issues. Again, links and references to national organizations or other areas where they can find help and frequently asked questions. The final section is the resource materials. and you see that there's a couple pages here that are shown on this slide of these resource materials. The one on the left is actually from the guide, and what it shows is that when it goes through ways to assess problems, it provides a link to, or a kind of reference to, the reference materials in the back. And there's basically about 10 reference materials that help provide processes or sheets or forms that they can fill out that really helps guide them through the whole assessment process. So again, those are linked, or those are referenced throughout the document so that they're easily accessible by the user. And the final thing that I want to say about this is that this is actually undergoing it's a part of a demonstration project that is supported by NHTSA and APBP, where it's being deployed in over a dozen communities, and they're using the guide to really assess if it's helped them in understanding their pedestrian safety issues and helping them address those issues. And they're evaluating the guide, and one of the plans that come out of this is potentially an update of the guide based off of the feedback from these dozen or so communities that have kind of pilot tested the guide. So that was a quick rundown of the things that I wanted to describe for those 3 guides. I think that we're going to open up to questions now. Is that right, Davian?
That's correct, Dan. I do want to apologize to anyone that may have experienced an audio issue. It looked like we were getting a little feedback there. We do apologize about that, and we'll see if we can get that taken care of for future webinars. Make sure we do not have that issue again. We'll go ahead and move into questions. Once again, please enter your questions into the box on your screen. If we do run out of time for your question, we'll attempt to answer and get back to you after the program. So I'm going to quickly move into our first question. The question asks, do we have any information as to how we are doing? Is there going to be a livability program under the new funding? What have you heard? And I think Charlie may be able to answer this question for us.
Okay, well, I think you're talking about the new funding, perhaps the new bicycle and pedestrian clearinghouse. And I don't know, Tamara Redmond, if she's online, maybe Tamara would want to address that question.
I thought
in terms of the livability initiative, Tamara, I guess they're talking about from Federal Highway standpoint.
Yeah, I'm guessing they're talking. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I'm guessing they're talking about funding in the transportation bill, and I know that there's been funding for that in there, but of course there's a question of whether that bill will get passed and how it will get marked up. So we don't really know at this point. We just know that there is something in there to provide for funding for livability initiatives, but it remains to be seen how it will turn out.
Okay, we'll move into the next question. And I think, Tamara, this may be a question for you. Could you talk a little bit about the reasons why FHWA combines the pedestrian and bicycle programs into one program?
Well, we really don't. There's 2 of us. I have pedestrians, and Dick Schaefer has bicycles. So we really haven't combined them together. There's 2 of us. We're just under a team called Vulnerable Road Users, and we haven't really combined any of our products either. We have PEDSAFE, we have BIKESAFE. They were created separately from 2 different teams. We're working on pedestrian safety audits, as Dan talked about, and we also have bike safety audits, which we're working on. And again, those are separate, so I don't think that we really combine them. We recognize they're very different users, and we try to keep them as separate as possible.
Thank you, Tamara. The next question asks, how is the Highway Safety Manual used in conjunction with PEDSAFE and BIKESAFE?
Okay, Dan, I don't know if you want to address that, but I don't think it really is specifically. I know the Highway Safety Manual did get some research behind it. NCHRP 17-25, I believe, is the number, but we were involved with some of that research to really try to quantify the relationship between different traffic and roadway features and pedestrian crashes. And that study it was headed up by Midwest Research Institute. We were a subcontractor there, but it did come up with a model for predicting pedestrian crashes as a function of things like number of lanes and median width and location with respect to senior centers and other factors like that, traffic volume, etc. And so that was really, I think, more involved with at least the initial version of Highway Safety Manual. I don't think there was a direct usage of PEDSAFE and BIKESAFE in the HSM.
Thank you, Charlie. We'll move quickly into our next question so that we can get through as many as possible. Are the PED and BIKESAFE cost estimates still valid? If not, is there updated data available?
I think I can answer that. They're probably very out of date, I'm guessing, right, Charlie?
Yes, certainly PEDSAFE, because that was done in 2006.
Yeah. I can say that we are going to be revising those materials. PEDSAFE is probably the first one we'll revise in the coming year, and then after that, BIKESAFE. So we'll definitely include, the new information in there when we revise those materials.
Okay, thank you. The next question asks, do you have research that supports the positive changes brought about by the use of different types of countermeasures? And this may be a question that we can follow up after the program with links if we have this information.
Yeah. I'll start, and Tamara, you can jump in too. Federal Highway did sponsor a series of toolboxes on countermeasures. One of them in particular, sponsored by the Office of Safety, does have several tables listing the best research information available. We call it crash modification factors, or in other words, what's the safety effects of different countermeasures on pedestrian crashes. And that one is on our website. And David, we can send a link to that. I don't think we have that on bicycles, but anyway, Tamara, do you want to add to any of that?
Yeah, there aren't a whole lot of the crash countermeasures, so we are definitely looking, and I think in future research we're looking to come up with some new ones. But there aren't any for bikes, I'm pretty sure, at least that we have enumerated at this time.
Yeah, the research is much more limited in terms of the effects of different roadway treatments on bike crashes. There are a few things. Libby may want to add just a few thoughts, but I don't think that there's anything that I've seen that's compiled in the same format as the toolbox for pedestrian and other kinds of countermeasures.
Okay.
The CMF Clearinghouse, too.
Yeah, there's a few things under the CMF Clearinghouse, but it's very limited on the bike side.
Right.
Okay. The next question asks, I've been told by police that they cannot give us crash reports in order to protect privacy of the individuals involved. Is there a good way to get around this to obtain crash reports?
Well, I'll try to answer that. I know that most agencies do have limitations on it. There's several things that are done. One thing is that sometimes they remove all that sensitive information, such as names and addresses of individuals involved. But then most police agencies also run their own crash summaries, because that's what they use for targeting enforcement and things. So they might be able to get kind of a crash summary by area is another kind of potential method they could use.
All right. Thank you, Jan, and we'll move into the next question. We have a question from a caller. It says, or attendee, it says, where would I find the best database that would show me PED bike accident locations in my area? And they are in California.
Oh, well, let me speak. There's recently a new program, and there's been a lot of work to geocode pedestrian and bike crashes in California. It's being done currently by the University of California, Berkeley. David Ragland is the lead investigator there. And from what I've seen, an illustration of how they've really geocoded at least the most severe pedestrian and bike crashes, the fatal and I think A-type injury. And they have software that can really show like a visual plot of the pedestrian bike crashes on a map for city by city. So what we can do, Davian, is I can contact Dr. Ragland and maybe see. They may either have a link to that software or it's going to be made available soon. I'm not sure quite, but we'll get that information out to the viewers.
Okay, and what we'll do is we'll post that with the archive at www.walkinginfo.org/webinars. Okay, the next question asks, do we know of any plans to update PEDSAFE and BIKESAFE with countermeasures that have been developed since it was published?
I think we sort of answered that earlier, but yes, we do plan to update them. PEDSAFE will be probably this year and next year, and then after that we'll do BIKESAFE. So we do plan to put in new crash countermeasures.
All right. Thank you, Tamara. It looks like we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to pass the presentation back to Charlie for closing remarks. I do want to remind you that there will be a recording and transcript of today's program as well as a PDF view of the slides available in about a week at walkinginfo.org/webinars. I also do want to remind everybody about the brief survey that will appear once the webinar has ended. So now at this time, I'll pass it back to Charlie for closing remarks.
Okay, thanks, Davian. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. And as Davian said, we do have websites that contain these kinds of tools and other information, walkinginfo.org, excuse me, and bicyclinginfo.org. And Tamara, do you want to give them the FHWA website to your pedestrian bike information?
Should I just, it's kind of hard, should I just put it in the chat pod, or? What's that?
Yeah, that'll work. I think that'll work really well. And David, maybe we can send that out to the attendees.
Yes.
And I guess finally, if there's anything that, we can do at the Pedestrian Bike Information Center or questions maybe for Tamara and Federal Highway, please send them to us. Send us an email or call us. We'll be glad to help any way we can. And we have other resources, consultants and folks that also we can rely on in case there's a question that we can't answer. And I guess the last thing I just mentioned to you folks in the last 30 seconds is we have a new program called the Walk Friendly Communities Program. And it's an opportunity for cities, towns to have kind of a template, a form, a questionnaire they can fill out. They really ask questions about all the different pedestrian elements, all the different E's, including policy and procedural methods. And then it's rated, and you can get a platinum, gold, silver, bronze, if you meet a certain level. And it's really intended to start the dialogue, interaction on what you can do in your community or town to really improve conditions and safety for walking. So we have some information on our website. If you're interested in finding out more, let us know. We just finished the first round of applications on the Walk Friendly Community and had a fairly good turnout. We're going to have another round in about 4 months from now. So if you're thinking about wanting to, get an assessment of your community for walking and pedestrian safety, that's something you might want to consider. So that's all I have, David.
All right, and we just sent out the link to the FHWA website as well as the link to the Walk Friendly website. I do want to thank our speakers today, Charlie Zegeer, Dan Nabors, Libby Thomas, and Tamara Redmond for answering questions. Once again, if we did not get to your question, we will attempt to answer that question and get it posted to the Walking Info site along with the archive. And I want to thank everyone today for their attendance, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.